Hey QED Coders, this is Michael, and we are live on Discord, ready to talk to anybody who might join. Jan is not going to be joining today, but I do have a quick walkthrough of some work that I've been doing on the MAUI example of Jinaga.net. And so we will leave the stream running and see if somebody wants to join in and have a conversation about historical modeling. If you do, then head on over to immutablearchitecture.com, and there you will find a link to the Discord server. And we meet at this time every week, 1300 UTC on Thursdays. So let's talk about the Jinaga. There we go. All right, I think that's a little bit wonky. Let me just adjust this. Make that stream a little bit better. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the MAUI application that is known as Blog MAUI. So this is an example Jinaga.net application, and the idea here is that we are running a very simple content management system. So somebody can use this application in order to create content and post it up on some blog somewhere. So what I have just gotten working is the dependency injection portion of this. So let me go ahead and get started with the app shell. So back here on the shell, we've registered these two routes, gatekeeper and main. The gatekeeper route is the default route. That's the one that we want to navigate to begin with. Then right here we're registering those two routes inside of the routing framework. And then when things start up, we want to actually navigate to the gatekeeper route. I actually can't recall right now if it's just because that is the first one registered, or if we're doing something specific to navigate to it. And I don't see any specific navigation to the gatekeeper page. It's just registration. Okay, so yeah, I think that might be all that I needed to do. But both the gatekeeper page and the main view model, they take, or the main page, take their view models as a constructor parameter. So how do I actually get the view models into those pages? Well, that is all dependency injection. When I first started integrating Jinaga into this application, I was copying the patterns that I had in Jinaga.js, and those were all about using singletons and that sort of thing. But now I am using dependency injection, and so I'm able to inject the Jinaga client into the view models. So here is my gatekeeper view model, for example, and we can see that this one takes an authentication provider. Let me go back to the main page to take a look at the post list view model. And this one takes a Jinaga client. So these are other objects that are coming from the dependency injection container. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I am setting up dependency injection and get everything registered. That starts right here in MAUI program. Okay, and this part right here, this is going to be in your MAUI app whenever you do a file new project. So we're going to use MAUI app. This part you'll need to add once you add the MAUI Community Toolkit. I highly recommend using that. That gives you access to MVVM, which we talked about in a previous video. And then we start to add some services. So this part is new. The first service that we add is the HTTP client. So that gives us access to an HTTP client factory that then I can take a dependency on and use anywhere that I need. That way I can create HTTP clients without worrying about, do I reuse them, do I dispose them, all that stuff. It takes care of the lifetime. I can just grab that factory from the container and then create an HTTP client anytime I need it. And then I'm going to add a few services here. Let's start by creating the settings. So here in my Jinaga config, previously this static class just exposed the Jinaga client as a static property. And then you could just access Jinaga client from Jinaga config anywhere you wanted to. But now I'm using this as a way to set up my DI container. There may be some refactoring that needs to happen here, but we will take that as we go. So it's just going to create a settings object and call verify. So let's focus on what this settings object is. I've chosen to do something very simple with settings. I created a partial class. So right here is settings CS. It's got some instructions to my fellow developers about how to set up the other side of this partial class. So create a settings.local.cs and give it a constructor. Oh, right here. I don't want to be internal. I had to change this to public, and if we just let it be partial class, then it will inherit the public. And so inside of the constructor, go ahead and set up your replicator URL, your auth URL, your auth token URL, all of the things that that you get whenever you create your own replicator as a service. The scope will be fine. You'll want profile read and write, and the callback URL will be fine. So we will listen for blog MAUI //callback. Verify simply checks to make sure that you've actually followed those instructions. So if replicator URL comes back with this default value right here, then it says, nope, you need to override your own and provide your own settings. So that's a really quick error message to help people who just clone the repository and run things to get an exception that will lead them back to the file that has these instructions. But once you follow those instructions, now you've got a constructor that sets those properties the way that you need them to be. And so that way, when I need a settings object, I will call your constructor and then call verify to make sure that you actually wrote a constructor. So that's how we get access to the settings. Now that we've got the settings, we will want to create the authentication provider using those settings. So create authentication provider is right here inside of the same Jinaga config class. And it takes an iSettings provider. In fact, create settings did as well, it just didn't use it, so I used the underscore name to get it to ignore that property, or that parameter. But now that I have settings in my service provider, I can get that required object, that required service of type settings, and now I've got access to it. Here I'm also getting the iHTTP client factory that I registered earlier. And now I can set up an OAuth client. So the last the last stand-up that we had, we talked through what the OAuth client is doing, and this may or may not become a NuGet package at some point in the future. So we can give it all of the URLs that we need from these settings, and give it the HTTP client factory. And now we have our OAuth client that we can use to create an OAuth 2 HTTP authentication provider. Now I could register this in the factory and then, or in the DI container, and then use the DI container to resolve this one. Since nobody else is going to be using this OAuth client directly, I decided to go ahead and do this all inside of this one factory method. And that sets up our authentication provider. Now notice the authentication provider is coming back as an OAuth 2 HTTP authentication provider. That class implements the iHTTP authentication provider interface. That's going to be important later. So let's come back to where we're registering everything, and this right here is where that becomes important. There are other components that require an iHTTP authentication provider, which is the interface. And here we have registered the OAuth 2 HTTP authentication provider class. So this extra registration right here means that anytime somebody asks for the interface, use the container to resolve that class and give that back. So that is going to be my implementation of that interface. But before we go there, let's go on to creating the Jinaga client. And this used to be the main purpose of Jinaga config. Now it's providing access to a few other objects that are going to be necessary throughout the application. So, I broke it down and made it all part of DI. So this is also taking a service provider. And then we get the authentication provider. So that is the interface that we just talked about. And we are getting the settings object. Very good. Now we can call Jinaga create, Jinaga client create. And this lets me set up my HTTP endpoint and my authentication provider and other properties that we can set up as well. So, for example, if we wanted to connect to a local database, then we would use the Jinaga SQL or Jinaga SQLite factory in order to create our Jinaga client. And that way we can set up the SQLite. Let's walk through that together in just a second and see if we can get that working. That'll be exciting. So, I've set up all those things inside of the service or the service container, dependency injection container, and so now I also set up my pages and my view models. So we already looked at how the post list view model is getting the Jinaga client, and the gatekeeper view model is getting the authentication provider. The gatekeeper view model needs the authentication provider in its full class form because there are some extra methods that it calls on that authentication provider that are not part of the interface, like the method to log in, for example. So let's see how much of this is working right now. What we expect to see is that we will go to the gatekeeper page. That will call initialize on the model, on the view model. Initialize will use the authentication provider to initialize, and that's going to see if I already have a token. And if I do, then I will be logged in, and then this will navigate to the main view. that's what I expect to happen. So let's go ahead and run that on the Pixel 5 emulator right here. We can put that away for right now because that is something that I want to try out next. Okay, so we saw that it recognized that we were logged in, and then it navigated to the main page, which is using the post list view model. Now I currently have a bug where I am prematurely disposing an HTTP request message. So I happened to fix this bug just moments before we started. So let me manage my NuGet packages and include the pre-release from my my local package source. I just did a build over here. So C projects Jinaga net packages. That is where I'll find my new build of the Jinaga library. So let's add that as a package source. This is going to be C projects jinaga.net /packages. This will be local Jinaga packages. We'll update that. Yep, that's got the right path in it, and then say OK. And now let's take a look at local Jinaga packages, including pre-release. Let's browse those, and now here is Jinaga 071. Yep, that's what I called it. Okay. So that's still the same version number as before. So let me, oh, I know why. That's because I haven't committed this change. So here is the change I had an accidental using right here. So let's commit that. In fact, I don't want that to be on the main branch. So let's create a new branch. Let's call this HTTP fix. Okay, so that's my HTTP fix branch. That's where I have that. So let's go back to main. Git reset hard origin main. Okay, so now main is back where it belongs, and I can get check out HTTP fix. Okay, now when I do a .NET pack, then NerdBank should give me a new version number here. Let's take a look, and now I've got Jinaga 072 Alpha 01. Perfect. So refresh that, and here we have a new version. Now I can update. Perfect. And this should fix that little problem. Let's see. Takes a little while to build. This is why hot reload is so important, so that if you're making small cosmetic changes, you don't have to go through all of this every time. But updating a package was a pretty big change. Okay, navigate to the new page, and boom. All right. We have a 403 forbidden. Aha, okay. We are making some progress. Let me break when this exception is thrown, and that way I can see what's going on. Sometimes progress is just a new error message. Okay. So, I expected to see some new information in the call stack, but I guess because it is actually inside of the Jinaga library, it's having trouble with that. Okay. But the reason that I would be getting a forbidden would be that my token is not getting set up properly. Let's go to the OAuth2 authentication provider. And so here I am initializing, so I'm getting the token from the load token from secure storage. So let's deserialize that authentication token, and let's store it in the authentication token field. So there's authentication token right there. And then when I try to do send or set request headers, this should be pulling my authentication token out and then adding it as a bearer token to the headers. Let's just make sure that that is happening. Reload. Okay, so here's my authentication token. I have an access token right here and a refresh token right there. So that should set it up as a bearer token. That looks like a really nice access token there. Yeah, go ahead and copy that, and then you can get connected just like I am right now. You can get access to all my test data. Okay, so what is going on with this? We are currently trying to do the load in order to check to see if I've already got the username for the logged in user. So actually I wrote this code on the stream last time, so go back and watch that if you need to understand what this code is doing. But on the way to executing this query, it needs the authentication token, the bearer token. So it does that. Okay, interesting. So login gives me back a user which has my public key. Okay, so that means that the access token worked. There's the public key that Jinaga generated for me when I logged in. That's good. Here's my profile that I don't have a display name. For some reason that's coming out blank. That's curious, but we will look into that later. So login worked, so now let's run query, and that should take us back to that same breakpoint. And it does. Okay, so now we set the authentication header. but this time we get a 403 forbidden. Okay, right. 403 forbidden means I know who you are, you just can't do what you asked to do. And that is because I have not authorized reading the names. There we go. That is the problem. So let's go ahead and kill that. So I can go ahead and authorize the names, and this would start working. Let's try that. Let's see how much effort that's going to take. So I'm going to go back to, oops, don't need anything out of there. What I need is VS Code. So if we go back to, hey, here's the book. We're not writing the book right now. If we go back to Jinaga.net, no, it wasn't in Jinaga.net, it was actually in blog MAUI. That I started creating. Yeah, I started creating some HTTP files. So what I want to do is define the distribution rules. So let's close all these. The distribution endpoint that I'm using is set up right here in HTTP in local. Now, if I recall correctly, we did this on a different replicator, and so these values are no longer any good. I want to set this up on this replicator right here. So let's check that out. Here's blog MAUI. And here is my replicator URL. So N25. Yep, this is a different one. So let's update this real quick. Here's my replicator URL, my auth URL, so authorization endpoint. Token endpoint is this. Token endpoint. Client ID is this. Perfect. We are still using Pixie. And then I can set the authorization rules with that endpoint. And I can set the distribution rules with that endpoint. Now, I also need to update the secret. It's not the DWT secret, it's the +IC secret. For this, of course, I am going to go off screen. We definitely don't want anybody copying this secret. So let me update that, save it, close the file, and we are back. Okay. So now I've got the HTTP file for setting the distribution rules for this particular application. Now, of course, when you are working with an application yourself, when you're building a MAUI application, you don't want to write these rules by hand, but instead you will use the application itself. You'll write your rules in C# and then deploy them with CI/CD. Since I've already got this up and running, let's give this one a shot. So I'm going to say I want to share, and what I'm trying to share is this information. So given a user, find all of the usernames, where there are not any next username. So, given a user, that's a Jinaga.user. I want to find a name that's going to be, this username right here is a blog username. Such that name, arrow, user, right there. User being of type Jinaga.user is equal to user. And there does not exist a next blog user name such that next prior blog user name is equal to name. That name there. Okay, so if that next does not exist, that means this is the current one, and so I should be able to run that query. So I want to share that with everyone. So everyone can look up a user's name. That's the rule. Let's choose the local environment and send it. And it says that it created. Let's just see. Let's come back to blog MAUI. Let's run that again. Oh, why are you complaining now? Why does this happen? This seems to happen quite a bit. Alright, I'm going to shut down Visual Studio. I'm going to shut this one down as well. Put it in timeout for a minute. Let it think about what it has done. And then when it comes back, load blog MAUI. Now, have you reconsidered recognizing initialize component? You have not. Well, how about a clean? Oh, okay, you did reconsider. Okay, good. All right, well, let's build. Why are these? The call site is reachable on all platforms, but is only supported on Android. Yeah, these Android version things are really confusing. I get Android version errors and warnings all over the place. And it seems like I just said, hey, do the default. Why doesn't the default just work? But let's see if it's able to run. So here's the emulator. And you're back to this. The initialize component does exist. I promise you it does. Rebuild. Take a look at the XAML. Say, yes, this is the XAML thing. XAML thing creates initialize component. It makes a partial class. Let's see. We don't have the option to run the custom tool. Okay. What has changed? Is it just my Jinaga version? Yeah. What about this? Yeah, I changed the comment. And then I changed my distribution rules. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, put you in timeout one more time. Open. Okay. You're thinking about it, you're thinking about it. It's yellow. Stay yellow. It's not yellow, and now it's squiggly. What is the issue with this? Okay, I'm going to clean the solution. I mean, cleaning the project is the same thing. I'm going to rebuild the solution. Okay. Let's switch to Windows Machine. So Windows Machine is good. It's able to build with that selected, and then this has got the error. I hear you. You went up? We might get a surprise visitor today. Okay. So that seems to be working when it's Windows Machine. Unfortunately, I haven't got the Windows stuff set up for logging in. But, oh, now it's not working on the Windows Machine. So iOS, Android, Windows, yeah, none of it likes it. Okay, well, we seem to be stuck on this again. This sometimes does happen. I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to clean first, then shut down Visual Studio, and then start it back up again. And we'll just try that one last thing. And you know what? Actually, I don't need to rebuild it because all I had to do was deploy the distribution rules. So if that worked, then I should be able to check the name, but it crashed. And unfortunately, I can't see what the reason for the crash is. And so for that, I do need to connect the debugger. All right. So let's try one more time. I'm going to go to the Android emulator, Pixel 5. I'm going to try to build for that. Skipping the analyzers. Does the analyzer need to run for it to initialize the component? Let's hope not. Okay, it's still yellow. And it's building. Okay, somehow that worked. All right, so that's the new thing to try. Every time you get the squiggly under initialize component, clean, shut down Visual Studio, start it back up again, and then build. And we still get this for these other targets, but it seems to be working for Android. All right. There we go. So we know that this is working. Let me clear that breakpoint. Continue. And now, all right, we have usernames. We have 0 usernames, which is exactly what we expect. We have not set any usernames. So the the profile display name is still blank. So we need to work on replicators of service and figure out why that's the case. But here we have, we are trying to set the username, and so we're going to set it to blank. This usernames collection is empty, so that's the prior collection. And let's say Jinaga client.fact. Okay. The response is forbidden, right? Because I don't have permission to set the username. Well, if I have successfully updated my distribution rules, there's no reason that I couldn't update my authorization rules as well. So let's go to the authorization rules. So I am authorized, anybody is authorized to create a user just by logging in. And then we've got authorization rules for the blog itself. But let's go ahead and create an authorization rule for the username. So name being a blog.user.name. Who is authorized to create that fact? So we're going to have the user being a Jinaga.user, such that user is equal to name user being a Jinaga user, and that user is authorized to create the name. So that's what the rule says. Let's send that to the authorization endpoint. Boom, created the authorization rules. Nice. Now let's see if we can make that work. There we are. We are going to say Jinaga client.fact. Continue. And I think it made it past that stage. Now it's trying to load the posts from the back end. And we're running into some problem there. But step by step, we're getting closer to a fully functional MAUI application. Okay. So this is going to be where we call it for today, but yeah, I think we've made some progress. So we've got dependency injection working in a MAUI application. We are injecting a Jinaga client as well as the authentication provider, and then using that authentication provider in order to log the user in, and then even running a query for the username and updating that username. So we still have some defects to take care of in the replicator as a service, and then we can continue forward and get the rest of the features working in the mobile application. After we've got those features working, then we can turn on the SQLite storage locally, and we'll be able to have an offline mobile application in MAUI. So the goal is to have this fully working end-to-end by the end of the year, and then I will turn it over to you and ask you to create some MAUI applications of your own. Let's see if we can get this this Jinaga project off the ground. Next week, I will have a State of Jinaga video, and that it will be going over the replicator as a service. So come on back for that, and until then, I'm looking forward to seeing what you build. Thanks.